speak in English, while the presentation itself is full of pictures, so you don't need to bother with the Slovenian. While this artwork was conducted in 1718 under the auspices of the Museum and Galleries of the city of Ljubljana, and our team was proposed with the Archaeological Research Consortium for Ljubljana. So the general alignment of the site is some 600 meters north of the northern gates of Emona, nearby the Via Publica, which led towards the north, obviously. So the majority of, let's say, these more common lines of the development of the necropolises of Emona was already explained by my predecessor, while the situation I want to show is that how much differ this Gosposvetska street cemetery from the other necropolises in the area. So it is so unique. At least one, let's say, very strict point is that we have 100 sarcophagi only on this site, and all other parts of necropolis is just 20. So it is quite distinct measure, and the other main point of our observation is that the majority of other sites which produces the skeleton burials in sarcophagi, those were interred in the ruined architecture, and our architecture, which was discovered at the Gosposvetska cesta, it was built particularly for the cemetery purposes. So these are a few lines of, let's say, these most probably early Christian burials from the other sides, let's say this is from the eastern necropolis, one most probably from the northern necropolis, very close to our site, and there is an Aigostina. It's some sort of Helden, which of course delineates the area of the burials of the, let's say, predecessors. So this is very particular site, which was then the spatial use of this area was also, let's say, taken over by the monastery of the Augustiner in the 16th century or the 17th century. And this particular spot of this column marks more or less the specific spot where the first archaeological, perhaps, discovery in Emona was made. So this is the spot on the top. So this sort of taberna, the public taberna, was the site where this stone of the Secunda was first discovered. More close. Excuse me. So this is the excavation under the Taucher Palace in the 1867, 1868. So you see the. Excuse me. Okay. So this is the area of the Taucher's house. This is the ordinary part of the northern necropolis, let's say, raised from the 1st and the 2nd century. And this is the part of the necropolis which is already the part of necropolis we investigated, and it is the sarcophagi and also one lead coffin which were discovered in the southern part of this tractus of the Taucher's house. The excavations conducted by the museum custodian Alphonse Milner, he was very precise observer, so he immediately noted that it is not the ordinary case of the sarcophagi installed in the, let's say, in the altar architecture, which is not used anymore. And he observed that the plasters were put over the graves. So obviously they were interred and then covered with the plaster. In the 1892, our strongest indication that this could be a part of the early Christian cemetery was discovered, displayed with great inscription, which clearly states that the father and the Marinus and Mother Ursa installed this monument for their sons Johannes and Marcellinus. So that was discovered probably in the very center of our site in the 1892. The excavations of the Gosposvetska cesta were obviously very, very intense, and a lot of endeavor was put into it. So over 360 graves were discovered. This is more or less the last picture, let's say the last situation. Obviously, we annexed the data from the older excavation, and there are still a lot of sarcophagi under the Figubex house, but they were only mentioned after the building was pulled down in the late 18th century. So our line of investigation showed that the first phase is linked most probably to the mid of the 3rd century, and the last one ending, the last phase of the architecture comes around the beginning of the 5th century, and into the rubble of the whole complex, 2 children graves were interred in the late 10th century, which is very particular. So the beginning of the whole necropolis is a small cella memoria, 5 to 5 meters square, with the oldest grave of the woman. It's 30 to 40 years old. It's a sort of cella memoria, a sort of small mausoleum. This is after the discovery, very, let's say, quite publicly renowned grave because it was the first grave from the necropolis, and also the finds which were accompanying the deceased into the grave were this marvelous blue bowl, the veil with the golden threads, and 2 bracelets from the jet or the gut. So the bone, the collagen from bone shows a slightly older age, but the whole stratigraphic situation is more or less clear that we're dealing with the period around the mid of the 3rd or perhaps 2nd, 3rd of the 3rd century. So this is the famous bone with the inscription "Ie zezais ei poloi chronoi," so drink to live forever. The primary glass production was analyzed, and it most probably derived from the Syro-Palestinian coast, not perhaps the vessel itself, but according to the inscriptions and the provenance of the glass, we're inclined to believe that it is from the east. A few pictures of it. So there are similar bowls, most often found today in the private collections because such parts are very valuable, and all derives from the Eastern Mediterranean. This is the only, let's say, analogy for the method and way at which the bowl was manufactured. It was with the cutting and removing the excess parts of the glass, not with some sort of mold. A few iconographic analogies, very similar wine leaves are found. So everything points out to the 2nd half of the 3rd century AD. The gagat, of course, we know the material, also very popular in the 3rd century, so a sort of Schwarzenmode in the 3rd century. And then the architectural complex just booms. So we have a large hall built directly over the older cella memoria. So this large hall is some 12 to 6 meters, 6 meters wide and 12 meters length. And before that, they pulled down completely the older, let's say, building, the older mausoleum, and the alignment of the both objects is completely is more or less to the 1 degree. So mausoleum was pulled down, a large hall with pilasters, and then another annex was made to the northwest. A small part of the mosaic to the, let's say, built or installed after the Constantinian period. It was probably representing a floor of the mausoleum with a cressolia where the sarcophagi were installed. So this is very similar mausolea at the Via Triumphale in Vatican City. So that is how we imagine that this mausoleum could look like. A few, of course, analogies for the color combinations and the dimensions of the tesseract, of course, correspond to the period. And then the majority of the graves follows the orientation of the architecture, which is northwest to southeast, and the majority of heads in the skeleton graves were placed at the west, looking to the east. So all the graves follow the direction of architecture or are perpendicular to the architecture. There are some 100, as I explained, sarcophagi graves, and the other 250 they are plain graves with ordinary pits. The vast majority, 75% of the graves contains nothing beside the remains of the deceased. But there are a few graves, of course, which are quite eminent. This is a grave of a young girl with all the pieces of the bracelet, as you see, the armlet, the finger ring, also one jet or glass, dark glass, blue glass, or black glass bracelet, and it is obviously we are dealing with the items which were produced in the second half of the 3rd century, but the girl was interred in the mid of the 4th century. So another development of the complex to the southeast, built tombs, and this phenomenon of reuse, secondary use of the older material from the necropolis, of course we met also here, and this is when one of the earliest tombstones from Ljubljana, from Emona, and this is also the veteran of the 15th Legion, which was most probably, at least a part of the Legion was stationed in Emona in the Augustan period. And that is a new inscription, which is still under examination by the colleagues from the Slovenian Academy. So we are dealing with a very, very particular function of the father, which is campi doctor, so-called. It's not a drill instructor per se, but in the older period, campi doctor meant drill instructor, but in the period of the 4th century, it is a high position in the legionary hierarchy. So the father was Peto, and the child was Dacatiateus, most probably. But it is very poorly preserved, the letters, and there are a lot of ligatures, a very, very complex plate. So as I explained, very few graves with the items, and this is quite characteristic, and the surrounding cemeteries contain a lot more. So it is some sort of very particular necropolis, organized and closed by the two to the northwest, let's say enclosed by two ditches, and to the southeast with the road itself. Bracelets, obviously the majority of bracelets were worn onto the right hand, or onto the left hand, and it is quite a similar occurrence at the other parts in the empire at the time. A few earrings, another collar, a lot of beads. This particular is from the armlet. Some men attire, but very poorly attested. Cross fibulae, some bell buckles, usually relating to some higher administrative status or perhaps ex-military personnel. Few coins, then very scarce traces of refrigeria, And that is the final situation. So really very closed cemetery part with a lot of building phases. And we made a few of these more or less thorough investigation in isotopes of nitrogen and strontium also, and we are seeing that their nutrition was quite wealthy. So a lot of marine food, sea animals. So let's say comparing with a few things we can compare it because these analyses are not so, let's say, fashion before, so it is much richer nutrition than in the previous, let's say, centuries or even Iron Age. And the strontium analysis showed that only one person is from other parts, let's say, not from the region. So now, for now, this sample shows that there are most probably there were Emmonians. And that is all from me. Thank you very much for your attention.